And for your inspection, there is the hammer and the knife right next to each other so you can see the difference in the pieces. That knife is always going to give you those same beautiful cuts every single day, even if you take it out in the garage and beat up on your hammer collection with it. And one more time, here we go. All the good stuff still there?
There you go.
There you go. Have a great day.
Give me one of those sets.
Okay, there you go.
These paring knives make great gasket and sealant removers. Anyway, welcome to the first video of 2019. This is going to be a two-part video on rebuilding the Dana 300 transfer case. First part is going to be disassembly of the transfer case and some of the tips and techniques that I do when taking these transfer cases apart. They might be a little bit different compared to some of the other videos that you have seen on the web or on YouTube. So this may be of some interest to you if you are doing this type of work. Second part, of course, is going to be sub-assemblies and final assembly of the transfer case. So I hope you like it. Quick note, if you're trying to get a hold of me, there's an About Me section on the YouTube channel that has all my contact information there. So please check that out if you need to get a hold of me personally. And also, sometimes on the videos, you'll see little links for my email addresses as well as website addresses and so forth. So feel free to contact me if you have any questions or leave some comments below on the video. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and hit the notification bell button there, and you'll be notified of when some new videos come out that you might like. So thanks for watching. Let's get to it. There's several things you need. You're going to need a 9/16 socket, 3/16 hex socket over here. Both yokes attached with 1 1/8 nuts. The cover on the other side, I'm going to flip this around, is 1/2 inch. So what I like to do is remove the yokes first. It's pretty straightforward. 1 1/8 socket on them. You may want to hold it so it doesn't rotate. If you can, just put it like this. Put it on there. Some of these may have to be tapped out a bit, but they really are not press fit as you come out. Do the same thing on the other side. Put it around. Each yoke is going to have a nut and a washer holding it. Now I don't like mixing yokes up, so I'm going to just put a little one over here and a one over here so I know that this yoke goes with that set. Now you want to take the switch out. It's a 7/8 hex switch because you don't want to be rolling this around. Some people use engine stands to hold these, but initial disassembly, I don't want this thing to be rolling around on the switch so it can break. This one over here is a cover for the detents. This can come out too. There's no detent pins in here. It's just basically an access port. Now what I'm going to do is flip it around and take off this top cover. It's really a bottom cover. Want to find a suitable spot that you could pry against to take this cover off. Isn't that pretty? Of course, we're going to put this in a tank, clean that up. This set looks really nice. Nothing looks broken. Nothing looks like it was run low on oil. The pads look good on the shift forks. Looks pretty good. So a lot of people approach taking this transfer case apart in many different ways. I like taking the intermediate shaft out first and getting at the shift forks and loosening everything up so I'm not fighting with anything. Everything should kind of float when I take it apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put some wood underneath here so you could see better what I'm doing. This thing is kind of heavy, man. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this hold down tab for the intermediate shaft. It's a 1/2-inch tab. We're going to get at it. Don't lose your tags. These little ID tags for it. And the stuff is a little bit crusted in here from it collecting dirt. There's the tab, the hold down tab. I'm going to turn it around this way. The intermediate shaft is right over here. We're going to punch this shaft right out. A little bit of an O-ring seal on this shaft here. Now you can actually use anaerobic gel. Seal is going to be replaced, of course. I'm going to pry this up like this. Let's see if I can grab it. So we had all sorts of needles, obviously, you see falling out of here. You don't want to lose them. See, by taking out the intermediate shaft, you'll have access to get at the shift forks. And the reason why I want to do that is because I like leaving this stuff kind of in here so that it doesn't load up the forks. A lot of people start taking this stuff out first, and then these pieces are going to drop down on the forks more, and what that's going to do is put a big load on the rails, so you have a hard time removing this piece where the rails are in. The rails are kind of locked into this end plate over here, and it's better to kind of keep these things stationary right now and work on releasing the forks. That's all about weight. This thing is heavy, and you don't want to be messing around with having things loaded where you don't need them. This way, with the intermediate shaft exposed, we're able to get at all the set screws for the shift forks and remove the forks and the cover that holds the forks and the bearing retainer over here and work from there. So you can see your 2 set screws over here for the shift forks. One is over here and one is over here. Now usually what I recommend doing is that you always shock the set screws first so you don't strip them. This is a problem with people also doing Ford top loaders. They get in there with a wrench and they start screwing on this thing and turning it, and then the screw strips. And you don't want to be dealing with stripped set screws, especially deep down here. So just give them a little bit of a shock first. That helps loosen them up, believe it or not. It's like putting an impact gun on them. I'm using one of these ball end extensions. You can actually, I've got these sets, believe it or not, at Home Depot. So it's 3/16 long hex driver. Again, I shock these first. It makes it a lot easier for them to come out. I'm not going to take them out fully, but I am going to back these things out as much as I can. So I've got 5 9/16 bolts holding the front retainer here with the rails. And there seems to be some sealant on these bolts, so they're pretty tough. I like doing these by hand because I'm always afraid that something's going to strip or break if I use an impact. So until I get them really loose first, then I'll take them out with the gun. Yeah, they had some thread locker on them. Could have heated them up first. Okay, now what we want to do is get a little bit of a load off this thing again. See if I could pull these rails out with the retainer. Inside this is detents and an interlock for the rails. We'll get to that later. But you've got your bearing race pressed into this over here and a seal. Pretty much like a rear axle almost. I'll be able to probably fish these forks out now. One fork. Pretty good shape. And the other fork. Now this pad is worn on this fork here, so we're going to have to get some pads for this. So what you have here is you have these two gears, and you can see that they're sandwiched by two tapered bearings. One over here, one over here. And basically these bearings are pressed in place holding this, and so you have to remove the bearings in order to get this out. Right? Same thing over here with this setup here, just a little bit bigger. So before I take off this front cover, I want to remove the speedometer gear so everything is easy to take off without anything laying on one another. In other words, that's the trick, is to manage your weight. So it's going to come off with a 1/2 inch drive. Okay, so one thing that's really important about speedometer gears, this is an offset cam. And there's different numbers for the different driven tooth counts of the gears. Like this one says 2631. I can't make this out over here. It looks like 32 to 38. And this one says like something to 45 or whatever. And so you have marks where the clamp holds it in place like this. And you have these little tiny marks which are supposed to indicate on some area. And I don't see that area where this is supposed to line. So I'm going to just put a little bit of a mark here so I remember where it goes. Like that. And just to make note that we have 2631 lined up over here at that mark. Because you can see, you can flip this around. If you don't put it in correctly, you can actually destroy your speedometer gears. So that's very important. So you can see how this is offset. And so different tooth counts space the gear out differently on the speedometer. And that's very important that you make sure that your orientation is correct, because if you turn this the wrong way and install it, you can actually burn these gears up. These covers have tabs 180 degrees apart that you use for prying. In other words, you could fit a pry bar in here and a screwdriver. See that? Now this rests inside a roller bearing that's inside this other gear over here. So you want to inspect that this isn't chewed up at all. Looks pretty good. You can see it's starting to get a little bit of gall marks on it. So we just got to polish this up a bit and then remove this. So we can also take off the slider while we're at it and get that out of the way. Make a note. It looks like it goes the same way either way, but if you want to make sure that it goes in the same way, then look at this. This one has a number on it, okay? We have a part number on it. So we can actually know that the part number faces towards the retainer. It's an actual Dana part. Matter of fact, I'll leave it together like this on that piece. So now we can take off both of these back covers. So let's get to taking this cover off. Now, since this is on tapered bearings, you have to shim tapered bearings to keep it preloaded, all right? So you don't want to lose the shims, but there are going to be shims underneath this cover. Usually just changing the bearings, you really don't have to worry about reshimming. Usually only if you change gears, that's really important. Bearings are pretty accurate now, so there's no reason to start worrying about reshimming for new bearings. Four bolts, 9/16 head. The shims are right here that I'm talking about. If these racers seem a little sticky, spray some WD-40 in there. It'll loosen them up a bit. Right, so let me show you something here. If you could see, there's no way to take this bearing out from the front. Can't go out like this. It's not enough room to get a puller on it. So the only way to take this bearing out is actually to put it on the press, or if you're careful, put a drift on this thing and punch it through. You can put it back in place with heat, heat the bearing up and slide it in place, which is probably the easiest way to do that. But like a rear axle, this whole thing is basically held together by these two bearings, these two tapered bearings. And the only way to get them off is to use pullers. Now they put notches over here behind the gear. They grit pullers behind it this way because you can see that the gear is actually bigger than the bearing and there's no way to get clamps on it. So, but you can actually use the gear itself to press this bearing out as well once this one is out. So we're going to leave that there right now. So I'm going to just crack all these bolts loose first before I use the gun on them. Again, because I'm afraid of stripping bolts out. There's thread locker obviously on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to point this down like this, and I'm going to use the gear inside to actually break that rear retainer loose because it's on there pretty tight and it's machined pretty well. So you just want to get it started. It's an aluminum cup driver. I actually got this at Harbor Freight. So it looks like I've got the retainer cracked away from the case, which is good. Now I can flip this over. Use the driver to take the pinion out. See that? Now we should be able to get this out easy because these are in there pretty tight usually. There you go. You can see you've got a bearing in here like a rear axle. You need to know that there's also shims that are on here. You don't want to lose them. So now basically what we're left is removing these tapered bearings. What I'm going to do is take these studs out so I have a flat area to lay this case against in case, when I have to put things in the press, I want these studs removed. So I want to remove these studs because I need to have this case lay flat in the press. These studs have a 3/8 fine thread on them. What I do is I just put two jam nuts on it, lock them down, heat it up, and shock it. I want to heat them up because there's thread locker on all these studs, and I want to melt out the thread locker. Once it's hot, I'll shock it with a hammer, and they should come out. There we go. You can actually see the thread locker that melted, that's coming out. See it? All right, you can see I have this thing set up in the press now. I took out those studs so it will lay nice and flat. I'm going to just put a couple of sockets and pieces in here to start this thing and press it out. I'm supporting the bottom shaft with my hand underneath the press. Here we go. Put that there. Take out the gear. This is a little bit more tricky because you have to kind of get it to lay somewhat flat in here. And it seems pretty good. We'll try it this way and we'll see how it works. It's a pretty tight bearing. There you go. Actually, it just looks like a pinion from a rear axle, doesn't it? You don't want to lose this washer. Bearing. Here's the gear. Well, so now we got to work on the input shaft and take that apart. Take it out of the retainer. Change the bearing that's underneath it. You got this true arc snap ring here. We want to take that off. Slide the gear off. That's going to expose the bearing, and you can see it's held in with a snap ring over here. And we have to take that snap ring off and take everything out. Now this bearing is tight in this. What I usually like to do, since it's in aluminum, is heat it up a bit so that it drops out, rather than be pounding on this to get it out. Because you could pound on it. Let's see. We can just see if it's going to come out. Yeah, it is. But if it doesn't, heat up the aluminum. Now we can press this bearing off and change it. This bearing, by the way, is a standard 6209 bearing. It's actually the same bearing used in a Ford top loader. This will allow us now to change the front seal as well on the input retaining collar, and then put this whole piece back together again. Right, so I want to press that bearing off. We'll get the rest of this press work done right now. I'm just supporting the bearing. Got my hand again underneath there holding the input so it doesn't fall out. There we go. All right, next up on the press is the other output. We're supporting underneath the gear. This is coming off pretty easy. It's not on that tight. So let's put this back the way it goes. And you see the bearing just goes right on that, like that. Well, that wraps it up for part one of this series. In part two, I'm going to take apart some of the smaller details of the transfer case, show you how to take the rails out, reseal the rail mechanism, polish the rails, and put that back together. A few notes. This is pretty easy disassembly for me because I have a press, and it's pretty straightforward. But remember, I'm in Florida, so this transfer case probably didn't see that much bad weather. If you're up north or in the Midwest, you might see some snow and some salt, and that might corrode the splines a little bit, and that may cause the yokes not to come off that easy, and you may have to use a puller on the yokes or hit the yokes a little bit to knock them off. But pretty much, these came, as you can see, right apart, really easy. Only thing that you really need to do this properly and efficiently is a press. When we put it back together, we'll probably heat those bearings on, drop them in place, and the unit should go together pretty easy. So stay tuned for part two. Thanks for watching.